The team of scientists sweeping the depths of Loch Ness said tonight they'd made sonar contact with a large unidentified object.
It was the size of a yacht hull.
So it looked like a submarine coming closer and closer, and you could see the long neck.
Loch Ness is 23 miles of cold black water sitting over one of Europe's oldest fault lines. The lake never freezes. Sunlight never reaches its bottom. And for 70 years, sonar machines scanning that darkness kept detecting the same unexplained contact. Same depth, same movement, same path through the water. Then AI analyzed every sonar reading ever recorded. What it discovered turned a forgotten legend into something far more disturbing. The hydrophone that was not plugged in. In the summer of 2023, a man named Alan McKenna stepped onto a research vessel called the Deepscan and led the biggest official search the Loch had seen in more than 50 years. The team had thermal imaging drones supplied by a documentary film company. They had a 60-foot hydrophone built to pick up biological sounds from deep underwater. They had over 200 volunteers watching the surface from the shoreline. They had cameras pointed at the loch from 5 different countries at the same time. And on a quiet pre-expedition cruise, before any of the official equipment was running, the small group on the Deepscan heard something none of them could explain. 4 distinctive gloops, coming from somewhere below the boat. The sound was loud enough that everyone on board froze in the same moment. Alan McKenna stood up and ran for the recording equipment. Here is the cruel part of the story that you really need to sit with. The recorder was not plugged in. McKenna admitted it himself in an interview shortly after. He said they had heard 4 distinctive gloops. They had all got a bit excited, and they had run to make sure the recorder was switched on, and it was not plugged in at all. That happened on August 26, 2023. 1 year later, on a different quest weekend, the hydrophone was running properly, and it captured a strange rhythmic pulsing sound about 10 seconds long that no researcher has been able to identify since. Think about what that actually means for a second. We are living in an age of high-resolution sonar, satellite mapping, environmental DNA testing, and underwater drones that can squeeze into spaces no human can reach. And the loch is still hiding something from every piece of equipment we throw at it. To understand why this keeps happening, you have to go back to the very first time a machine heard something strange in those waters. Because that moment did not happen in 2023. It happened almost 70 years earlier, and the story has only gotten harder to explain since. The year DNA tried to settle everything. Before we travel further back in time, there is one experiment from recent years you really should know about. Because for one brief moment in 2019, science genuinely believed it had cracked the entire Loch Ness mystery for good. A scientist named Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago in New Zealand led a team that tried something nobody had ever attempted before. They did not look for the creature directly at all. Instead, they collected 250 water samples from across the loch in June of 2018. The idea is simpler than it sounds. Every living thing in that water sheds tiny fragments of its own genetic material into the surroundings. Skin cells, droppings, mucus, scales, all of it floats in the water column, waiting to be read by the right equipment. The team sequenced everything they could find. They cataloged around 3,000 different species, and the results were almost shocking in how clean they were. There was no reptile DNA in the loch at all. None. No plesiosaur, no monitor lizard, no surviving prehistoric anything. There was also no DNA from a giant sturgeon or a giant catfish. But one finding exploded across every news network on Earth within hours. The loch was absolutely soaked in European eel DNA. Eels were everywhere. At nearly every sampling spot, in every part of the loch, the equipment picked up strong eel signatures. Gemmell stood at a press conference and said something very careful. He said there might well be a Loch Ness monster, that they did not know for sure, and that they had not found it. But he raised one possibility that ran around the world for years afterward. What if the monster was just an unusually large eel? Then, in 2023, a researcher named Flo Foxon ran the actual probability numbers using catch data from Loch Ness and other European waters. The chances of finding a 1-meter eel in the loch were around 1 in 50,000. The chances of finding an eel longer than 6 meters, which is what most witnesses described seeing, were essentially 0. The giant eel theory had a hole in it the size of the loch itself, which left one very awkward question hanging in the air. If the answer is not a reptile and not a giant eel, then what exactly have machines been recording for the past 7 decades? The survey that was supposed to end the story. In 2003, the BBC decided to settle this question once and for all. They put together the most ambitious sonar survey the loch had ever seen up to that point. The plan was simple in design and almost brutal in execution. A boat would drag a state-of-the-art sonar array across the entire length of the loch, using satellite navigation to make sure not a single square meter of water went unscanned. The array used 600 separate sonar beams sweeping the water column simultaneously. The resolution was sharp enough to pick up a small floating buoy in the middle of the open loch. If anything large was hiding down there, this survey would absolutely find it. A team member named Ian Florence later said exactly what they found. He said the team had swept from shoreline to shoreline, top to bottom, and they had covered everything in the loch, and they had seen no signs of any large animal living anywhere in those waters. But here is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody talks about. The BBC team did one more experiment that you really need to hear about. They sank a wooden fence post under the water near a tourist boat. And then they slowly raised it so only a small square of wood would be visible above the surface. They asked the tourists watching from the bus to describe what they saw. Most of the tourists honestly reported seeing a square-shaped object. That was the truth. But when the team asked those same tourists to draw what they had seen on a piece of paper, many of them drew the shape of a long neck and a small head. The same head and neck shape that had been splashed across the front page of the Daily Mail back in 1934. The same shape that had defined the legend for 70 years running. The fence post never had a neck. The neck came from the watcher. The BBC had just proven on camera that the human mind fills in the gaps it expects to see. That should have closed the case forever. Empty sonar plus a clear demonstration of psychological bias plus a creature nobody could ever prove existed. But the case did not close. The sonar contacts kept happening anyway. And the most famous unexplained contact in the loch's entire history had happened 15 years before that BBC sweep, on a night when 24 boats lined up across the water and refused to let anything slip past them undetected. The echo that refused to go away. In October of 1987, a researcher named Adrian Shine pulled off something nobody had ever attempted on Loch Ness. He lined up roughly 24 small cruisers in a perfect curtain across the width of the loch, side by side, like a comb being dragged through tangled hair. Each boat carried a low-rance sonar unit donated directly by the equipment company. The founder of Low-Rance Electronics, a man named Darrell Lowrance, flew in from the United States to be on the water personally. The plan was to sweep the entire length of the loch in tight formation, leaving nowhere for any large animal to hide undetected. They named it Operation Deepscan. Over the course of 3 days in early October, the curtain of boats moved up and down the loch in careful formation. Most of what they recorded was exactly what you would expect to see. Schools of fish, the rocky lake bed, the occasional thermocline echo bouncing off the temperature layer. But on 3 separate occasions, the equipment picked up something completely different. The contacts came at mid-depth, in open water, did not match any known fish profile, and could not be relocated when the boats came back to look at the same spot. One of those contacts came in near Urquhart Bay, at a depth of about 590 feet underwater. That contact was strong enough that Darrell Lowrance himself stopped what he was doing and walked over to look at the screen with his own eyes. And then he said something on camera that has been quoted in documentaries ever since. He said there was something down there that they did not understand, that whatever it was clearly larger than a fish, and that it might possibly be some species that had never been detected before. He finished by saying simply that he did not know. Adrian Shine, the man running the entire operation, was far more cautious in his statements. He told reporters that he was not expecting a Jurassic reptile to surface, but he did admit the contacts could be a very large fish of some kind. He has spent the decades since walking back even that careful statement. He now suggests the 3 unexplained contacts were probably floating debris, thermal water effects, or possibly a seal that had wandered up the River Ness from the open sea. The official position of the scientific community is that Operation Deepscan disproved the monster. But the raw data tells a quieter story. 3 contacts, none ever identified, recorded on independent equipment by different operators. And the very first sonar contact in the loch's history, which had happened more than 30 years before Deepscan, had described almost exactly the same thing. The contact that started the pattern. In December of 1954, a small fishing boat called the Rival III was working the waters of Loch Ness with a primitive depth sounder. The crew was just trying to find schools of fish for the day's catch. What the equipment found instead was a large moving object at a depth of about 480 feet below the surface. The contact tracked alongside the boat for over 2,600 feet of distance before slipping away. It was too large to be an ordinary fish. It was too mobile to be debris floating in a current. It was too deep for the crew to ever see it with their own eyes. That contact was the first time a machine ever recorded an unexplained moving object underneath Loch Ness. It would not be the last by any stretch of the imagination. The years that followed produced a steady drumbeat of strange returns from every researcher who tried. In 1960, a man named Tim Dinsdale captured film footage of something moving across the loch's surface, and an analysis by British military intelligence later concluded that the object on his film was probably animate, which is the official word for probably alive. From 1962 through 1972, the Loch Ness Investigation Bureau ran continuous year-round watches using cameras, sonar, and rotating teams of volunteers. In 1972 and again in 1975, Robert Rines from the Academy of Applied Science captured underwater photographs in Urquhart Bay using strobe cameras triggered by sonar pings. One appeared to show a flipper, another appeared to show a gargoyle-shaped head. The images were published in Nature, with naturalist Sir Peter Scott proposing the formal name Nessiteris rhombopteryx. Sharp-eyed readers noticed within days that the name was a perfect anagram of monster hoax by Sir Peter S. The photographs had been enhanced almost beyond recognition. None of this touches the modern legend's actual starting point. The Mackay sighting in April of 1933. The surgeon's photo, published in the Daily Mail on April 21, 1934, which Christian Sperling confessed in 1994, had been staged using a toy submarine and a putty model neck. The visual history of Nessie sits on a foundation of grainy footage or fully admitted hoaxes. But the sonar history is genuinely different. The machines kept finding something real, and the reason they kept finding it has very little to do with biology, and almost everything to do with the rock the loch was carved out of. The fault that built the illusion. Loch Ness sits inside a massive geological scar called the Great Glen Fault. The fault runs more than 300 miles diagonally across the north of Scotland, older than the Atlantic Ocean itself. When the last ice age ended, glaciers scraped along the soft line of the fault and left behind one of the deepest freshwater trenches in Europe. The loch is over 23 miles long, less than a mile wide on average, and more than 750 feet deep. The fault underneath is still slowly active, producing small earthquakes on a regular basis. An Italian geologist named Luigi Picardi has argued that those tremors are responsible for many surface disturbances reported as monster sightings. He noted that periods of fault activity line up almost perfectly with peaks in eyewitness reports. He pointed to bubbles, sudden waves, and gas releases as direct side effects of rock moving below, saying that people had been seeing the effects of small earthquakes on the water's surface. The loch's depth and narrowness cause it to form a sharp boundary layer in warmer months called a thermocline. Cold, heavy water sits at the bottom, warmer water on top. When wind blows down the glen, that boundary tilts like soup rocking in a bowl. A study published in Nature in 1972 by researcher Thorpe measured an internal wave rising more than 10 meters, traveling over 200 kilometers across more than a week. That layer is exactly where almost every famous, unexplained sonar contact has been recorded. Peat washing in from surrounding hills stains the water dark and creates suspended particle bands that bounce sonar pulses back like solid objects. Picture it all together: a sliding thermocline, bands of suspended peat, gas bubbles from an active fault. Cold, deep currents nobody has ever fully mapped. Every condition needed to produce a phantom sonar contact sitting inside the same lake 24 hours a day for the last 10,000 years running. The pattern the machines keep finding. Earlier this year, a claim began spreading across the internet that an artificial intelligence had been fed every sonar recording ever made on Loch Ness, going all the way back to 1954, and that it had found a pattern in the unexplained contacts that simply could not be explained by random chance. Specific depths, specific times of year, specific routes through the underwater landscape. The claim was that something living had been moving through the loch on a schedule for the last 7 decades. No peer-reviewed paper has ever appeared to support that claim, and no university has confirmed running such a study. But here is the part you really should sit with for a moment. Because if you actually put every famous sonar contact from the last 70 years onto a single map, you will find that they really do cluster at the same depth range during the same parts of the year near the same underwater shelves. That part is genuinely real. The contacts do form a pattern. The trouble is that pattern is also exactly where the thermocline forms every summer, exactly where the suspended peat layers concentrate the heaviest, and exactly where the fault releases small pockets of gas. The pattern is not a creature. The pattern is the geology of the loch itself. Adrian Shine, who has spent more than 50 years studying these waters, has a line he uses whenever someone asks him about long-necked creatures. He says, of course, there are long-necked creatures on Loch Ness and that we call them swans. He moved to the loch as a believer in 1973. He realized she did not exist by 1975. He says that is the reason he is still standing on the shore today. And then there is Steve Feltham, who has watched the loch every single day from a converted mobile library since June of 1991. Guinness World Records confirmed his vigil again in 2023. He no longer believes in a prehistoric creature. He thinks the answer is a very large whale's catfish. He admits openly that the answer hurts to say. He hopes he turns out to be wrong about it. The truth about Loch Ness is not that something impossible is hiding under the surface. The truth is that the loch was built by geology to fool the human eye, and it has been fooling us perfectly for more than 90 years running. If you were standing on the shore of Loch Ness right now and saw a long, dark shape breaking the surface, tell me honestly what you would believe it was. Drop your answer in the comments below.